you. Before we begin, I want to just say it's great to see someone of your age interested in politics, because that was something, and when I grew up, not too many people were at all interested in politics, so it's great to see that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. Hello everyone. I'm Matt Carvalho, and with me is my guest, former U.S. Congressman, Lieutenant Governor, State Rep, Mr. Weygand, Mr. Bob Weygand. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. So my first question is, what is it that made you want to get into politics?
It was not something that I aspired to do. When I was growing up, when I went to college, I was involved a little bit in politics, but nothing substantial. I volunteered when I was living in East Providence. My wife and I were involved in the community, our church, PTA. I coached basketball and Little League baseball, that type of thing. And then I volunteered for the city planning board, and so they put me on the planning board, and I became chairman of the planning board. And then one year someone suggested I run for town council, city council. I said no, I wasn't really interested in that. And then 2 years later someone said, why don't you run for state representative? And thought about it. I could do it. I had the time to do it, so we ran, and it was a family affair. It was our kids, the kids from the basketball team and the baseball team, all helping on the campaign. It was a grassroots kind of campaign, and that's what got me involved. But I never aspired to do that when I was in high school or college, or even after when we first got married.
And what is it that, when you were a state rep, what is it that propelled you to keep going and go further and further up in the political ranks?
Well, I had, at that time when I was a state representative, I had my own architectural firm. I'm a landscape architect, and we had building architects and landscape architects. It afforded me the opportunity to do something more than just do my regular work. I had time, because I owned the business, to be able to go to the General Assembly. So that was good for me. I enjoyed it. But it wasn't until the situation of the bribery and extortion situation in Pawtucket that really then people suggested, why don't you run for higher office? And so in '92 I ran for lieutenant governor, and I won. In '96 I ran for the United States Congress and won. In 2000 I ran for the United States Senate and lost. So you have the good days and the bad days, but I enjoyed every bit of it. There are some parts of it that are always detestable, like fundraising and doing things like that. But I was happy with running for state representative. I thought I was successful in passing legislation that was important, and it was enjoyable. But I also knew that there was a limit to the amount of time you should spend there, and so after 8 years in the General Assembly, it was time for me to go.
And touching upon what you said earlier with the bribery scandal, when that was happening, did you ever think that you reporting him could end up putting your political career in jeopardy?
No, not really. I mean, it was a long time ago. It was 26 years ago. When that happened, it was more a matter of my personal beliefs, my family beliefs about what was right, what was wrong, but also believing in that you just try to do the right thing. And there was no sense, maybe I was being naive, perhaps I was at the time, that it would put my life, my family's life, my career, or my business in jeopardy. I just knew it was the right thing to do.
And with all of the corruption that there is, what do you think could be done to take down political corruption altogether?
I've been asked that a lot of different times. I say to people, it's important to realize that the people that are elected to office are there to reflect us. And if we're not vigilant about electing people that we really believe in, what will happen is people that are not so good will get into office. People that perhaps would do something more corrupt or corrupt will get into office. And so what happens is we get the people in government that we have voted for. And if we have voted for and we have not been diligent about really reviewing what's going on, you will have people that will be corrupt. But by and large, 98% of the people that are in government, municipal government, state government, federal government, are really good people. It's just you get a few bad apples that all of a sudden become the story. And there, as a result of that, what happens is government gets a black eye. In Pawtucket, I grew up in Pawtucket. When this occurred back in 1991, things after that changed dramatically. An independent candidate for office was elected mayor of Pawtucket, Bob Matibrier. He was not a Democrat or a Republican party player. He was a Democrat by his background. But the people of Pawtucket voted in someone that was a good leader, and they have since then. They've always done that. That's great, because people in Pawtucket have become more vigilant about what they want in their municipal office holders and their councilmen and their women and their mayor. And that's what it's all about. So as long as we as voters really flush out and be cognizant of and be diligent about the people we elect, corruption will be minimalistic.
And you did mention a little bit about the independents and parties. With another party question, when you were a Democrat.
Still am.
You are a Democrat. My apologies.
That's okay.
When you became lieutenant governor, soon after Governor Almond, who was a Republican, became governor, how were the two of you able to coexist and get things done with having different views and as different members of the party?
Well, in Rhode Island, which is one of the unique states, there's about 24, 25 states that have a independently elected lieutenant governor versus the governor. A lot of states, like Massachusetts and other states, have been run as a team, just as we do with the president and the vice president. So in Rhode Island, you can have a Democratic governor and a lieutenant governor who's a Republican or vice versa. When I was first elected in '92, the governor was Bruce Sunland, who was a Democrat. And there were times where Bruce and I got into hassles about different public policy and different things like that. When Link Almond was elected in 1994, back then there were 2-year terms, not 4-year terms. When he was elected, I had known him because he was the U.S. attorney during the Pawtucket situation, so I dealt with him to a certain degree during that. We got along just fine. There were times where there were differences of opinion. But I got legislation passed, which he signed, and it was a certain degree of camaraderie between the two of us. We knew each other, so it was fine. Remember, though, he's a far more moderate, almost left-leaning Republican than many other more conservative Republicans have been. Frankly, between Bruce and Link Almond, there were times where I had more fights with Bruce Sunland as a Democrat than I had with Lincoln Almond as a Republican.
And so do you think parties shouldn't really have much of an effect on our leaders and how they act and on government as a whole?
Well, in Rhode Island, we're a very liberal state. We're a blue state. And so many of the Republicans that are elected, like John Chafee and like Lincoln Almond, are more liberal or left-leaning Republicans, what we often call them as Rockefeller Republicans, more moderates. And so Rhode Island has always been a state where majority of people are overwhelmingly, majority of registered voters are more Democrat versus Republican. But keep in mind, in Rhode Island, the majority of voters are unaffiliated or independent voters. So we're pretty much independent state, but we tend to be Democrat. And party monikers, I think, in the labels in Rhode Island, they do matter. People traditionally want to see Democrats elected, but we've had a strong listing of Republican governors from Ed Dupree, Lincoln Almond, Don Kucheri. Lincoln Chafee was an independent when he was elected.
And another question back to when you were lieutenant governor. This is more of a two-part question. The first part is, what do you think your biggest accomplishment was as lieutenant governor? And the second part is, what do you think your biggest mishap as lieutenant governor were?
Two extremes. Well, the good thing was that back then the lieutenant governor presided over the Senate, so I was president of the Senate, so I was involved with the Senate all the time. We were able to get a lot of different pieces of legislation passed, which I thought was important, but probably the biggest one, which is probably for most people now it doesn't seem like very much. Back then, 24 years ago, 25 years ago, members of the judiciary were selected by the governor or in the Supreme Court situation, they were selected by the General Assembly. The General Assembly voted on Supreme Court justices. It was a very, very political process. Not to say that the process today is not still political, but what I introduced was legislation that was a constitutional amendment that changed the way we select Supreme Court judges and other justices. We established a judicial nominating committee where candidates are screened. Then 5 candidates then go to the governor. The governor selects one, and then the Senate then does a review of the candidate for confirmation. That was something I was very proud of because we had a very poor political system of selecting judges previous to that. And it took a constitutional amendment. So we got it through the General Assembly, but we also, the people of Rhode Island voted on it, which was special. That was good. I wish we were able to provide more benefits for education than what we did, particularly elementary and secondary. I still think there's a problem with the way we fund elementary and secondary education. Same way with higher education. I've always believed in a strong public education system, and I feel that we're still today not funding our educational systems the way we should.
And what do you think could be done with our current politicians to help the education system?
There are many of them that feel the same way as what I just mentioned. What people that in elective office, state office and local office really need to do is to be able to put themselves in the shoes of those people that are less fortunate. People will talk about it all the time. But you really have to know and understand the difficulty that people go through just to be able to put food on the table and have a roof over their head and send their kids to school. There are many parents that are struggling every single day. They don't have a living wage, they've got a low wage, they don't have the benefits that they should have. It's tough. And while we're seeing 4.6% unemployment rate in the United States and 4.4, I think it is in the state of Rhode Island, which is very, very low, that's virtually full unemployment. What happens is many people are living at a bare minimum wage. They're working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. And as a result of that, it's tough for them to get their kids into school and spend enough time with their kids to help them get educated and go to parent-teacher conferences, do homework, and do all the kinds of things that a necessary parent should do. To me, that's probably the most disappointing thing that I see that still happens here in Rhode Island today.
And sticking on the topic of education, you have had and still do have many positions in education. You have many ties with URI. You're also, I was told, you're on the advisory board here at Saints, Mr. Richard. Prominently with URI, what is it that you can do in that one school to help the students be able to accomplish their goals and help them get an education and get into the school?
Well, as you said, I've had for the last almost 20 years now a role in education. Prior to that, I used to teach and lecture at different places, but in 2001, I was selected to be the president and CEO of the New England Board of Higher Education. And then a few years later, I went to URI as vice president for administration and finance. Now I'm on the faculty at URI, and I teach there. And I lecture in other parts of the state and other parts of, frankly, I've lectured all over the world. I've been very fortunate. For students at URI, I'm no longer in a position to assist them with regard to entry, although many of the students that come into our master's program that I'm director of, I review all the applications, etc. We try to get as many students in as possible that are qualified. We work with them if they're lacking some educational credentials. URI in St. Raphael made a big difference in my life. And I felt very, very strongly about trying to help out and give back in whatever way we can. My wife and I established a scholarship fund at URI for single moms and students that are returning to college. We've also here helped out when we established with my classmates a scholarship for the class of 1966, which is my class that graduated here from San Raphael. Hopes that will provide some financial aid for students that are needy. I believe where you can do something like that, we should. If you can afford to help out, if you can just help mentoring students is very, very good. I've done that over the years in helping students that have been trying to get into school as well as students that are once they're in school to advise them and be a mentor to them. I've been very lucky. My wife and I, when we first started in life, after I graduated from UR, I had no job, we had no place to live, we were living on food stamps, and we've been very fortunate. We've had a lot of people who helped us along the way, and it's our responsibility to give back.
Now, you are correct. You are very lucky with your education job now. But when you were still like a current politician, what is it that made you say that you've done being a politician that you didn't want to run again for any position?
Well, as I said, I ran for the United States Senate in 2000, 17 years ago, and lost that race. And I lost that race for very good reasons. But it was the end of my congressional career. People have asked me to run, and I've thought about it sincerely. And it still nags in me a little bit to think about running. But it's really a new generation of leaders that we have, and I'm happy that we have them. I would consider running for office, but I think about all the pluses and the minuses of running for office, and I think there are many great people that are out there today that are running for office that we should support. So I'm very happy being in an education role and doing those kinds of things versus running for office.
All right.
So if the question is, am I running for governor? And the answer is no. Am I running for another type of office? Maybe, I'm not really sure. There are a lot of ways you can help your community and be part of the community without being in elective office.
Well, you did take the next question out. Well, my next question is, with recent terrorist attacks, attack on Halloween, Vegas, what do you think should be done with gun control? Like, it's been an argument that's been going on in Congress forever.
For a long time.
And do you ever think there could be something that they can do to stop these attacks?
Well, first of all, in Congress, they are so diametrically opposed and so at polar ends of the spectrum. You need to be able to have people in Congress that can move us more toward the middle, because the only way we're going to modify or change any of the gun laws or improve the situation with regard to gun violence is by having people that can come to some agreement about what to do. So what would that be? What could we do to modify or change some of the things? Some of the loopholes, holes in gun control legislation that exists right now, gun show loopholes and other things like that are necessary. Background checks are absolutely necessary in all different ways. The state of Massachusetts has a better program than most states has with regard to buying a weapon as well as ammunition and other things like that. There's also a big issue about mental health. Many of the people that have been the perpetrators in these situations have been suffering from some sort of mental health issue. Can you stop it? No, you can't stop it. But just like with politics, you have to be vigilant about mental health issues, about making sure that those that should not have guns are not having access to guns. That includes background checks, that includes other loopholes being closed. Will we ever get to the point where we never have violence like this? I don't think so. But we need to build a better community. People say it takes a village. It takes a village to build us up and to raise us up. And if we can do more of those kinds of things where we're helping each other, we will begin to minimize gun violence. But the situation in Las Vegas, or when I was a student in high school in Texas, at the University of Texas, I think